Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live episode of VisualStudio Toolbox. I'm your host, Leslie Richardson, and today we are going to be talking all about how you can automate your testing of APIs and UIs with the power of Playwright. So joining me today to talk about Playwright is Microsoft MVP, Bill Wolff. Hi, Bill.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
Awesome. So before I pass the reins over to you, quick housekeeping thing for everyone in the chat. If you have any related questions to web application testing and Playwright, we are here to help and try to answer those questions. So feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. And yeah, with that, have at it, Bill.
Thanks, Leslie. My name is Bill Wolff, and I operate under the company name Agility Systems. I've been an independent contractor doing Microsoft work for well over 4 decades. I'm a Microsoft MVP for, I think, 22 years. And in the community, I'm best known for running one of the larger .NET user groups called Philly.net. We've been in operation for well over 20 years. And we just had a code camp, which I've had many of those. But we had stopped doing code camps for a couple of years, 3.5 years, because of the pandemic. And we just had another event just a couple weeks ago. So I did this presentation there, and I wanted to share this with a bigger audience. So I'll be happy to show you what Playwright is and how it might be useful to you. So I do... I'm a Microsoft .NET MVP, and I do lots of C#, lots of .NET Core. But even before that, I was heavily involved in SQL Server, and I've done lots of database-driven applications for many decades. And then on the front end, I use a variety of products. I've been doing a lot of work in Blazor. What I'm going to show you today is Angular. And of course, I worked with React Vue. So, I try and sort of live the full stack life. And if you're a full stack developer, you might spend, I'd say you'd split your time into like 5 parts, 20% doing database SQL work, 20% doing backend work. Usually I do C# minimal APIs. 20% doing front end, making the data shine on the screen, putting it in the grids and forms and dialogues and things like that. And then you should, you probably end up spending 20% of your time doing, Git and code management and Agile and project management and Jira tickets, all of that kind of stuff that keeps developers busy so you can communicate with your teammates. But that doesn't add up to 100%. And my proposal here is that the other 20% you should be spent doing testing. And there are lots of ways to test at various layers in the full stack. I'm going to show you this tool called Microsoft Playwright, and it just makes testing a lot more fun. And everything I'm going to do today is within VS Code, but you can also work in the Visual Studio space.
Awesome.
So anyways, Playwright is a Node.js library, and it does web automation. So you can actually use it to operate a browser and go through step by step as if you were clicking on things. And then you can check to make sure the right values show. So people use this for automated testing. They use it for web scraping, where you could, for instance, you wanted to buy Taylor Swift tickets. You could automate your browser and have it go in and try and check for tickets every 10 seconds. Not that I would ever do that, but now when you're operating a browser, technically you're not operating the browser that's installed in your machine. you install a rendering engine, and they provide rendering engines that match Chrome, Edge, WebKit, and Firefox. Depending on who your client is, you might, need to turn these on and off, and I will show you where that's configured. There's a bunch of command line tools. I'll show you CodeGen and Trace Viewer in a little while. But I'm going to sort of take this from a full stack perspective. So I'll show you the back end, the database first. Then I'll show you the API. I'll show you how to test the API. And then we'll take that a step further and we'll actually show you how to test the front end. This has an extension for VS Code. It fits right in and with your workflow. And when you write your tests, you can actually write them in a variety of languages. The big competing product in this marketplace is Selenium. Selenium, oftentimes the scripting is done in Python, so they support that. But I'm going to be showing you TypeScript because I'm working in an Angular environment where my front-end coding is all TypeScript. But you could actually write all your tests in C# as well. And compared to Selenium, one of the advantages Playwright has is that it performs a little faster. And it does that because the wonderful folks at Microsoft figured out how to run things async and parallel execution, so you can be running multiple tests and going out and getting data and looking at different pieces of the browser DOM sort of at the same time, and it just runs really smooth. Now, a little history. The technology behind Playwright is actually based on something in the open source world called Puppeteer. And Puppeteer was very popular, over the last 20, 25 years. And as I understand it, Google was interested in this, and they sort of picked up the people who developed Puppeteer, and they set up a project team to have them sort of build a testing tool. And they sort of lost interest in that. And basically Microsoft took that team, brought it in house, and that became branded as Playwright. So, this is based on well understood, a very popular open source patterns. So the way you install Playwright, since it is actually, sort of JavaScript based to some extent, is you just do a node package manager and you install it. And once you do that, you can init it. Or if you want to take the easy way out, you just go into VS Code and you search for the Playwright extension. You install it, and then it has a set of instructions that actually do all the init stuff in the background. So what does Playwright actually look like? Let me show you this one here. So here we're in VS Code, and we're in the middle of a minimal API project. And just to prove that to you, this is a program CS, and you'll see here that it is adding a bunch of repos. I'll explain some of those in a moment. It adds Swagger. It does the Endpoint API Explorer. And then it goes here, and if you go down a little bit, it actually creates APIs. So this one is doing a map get. And down below, you'll see some of these have to do with the NFL, and some of them have to do with the PGA, golf. And I'll let you know, been a big time sports fan my whole life. So let's just think about that for a minute. Suppose we needed to do some demos and we needed some data. And suppose the month was October or November. What sport would be most popular?
Oh, God.
Well,
I'm assuming football.
Yeah. It's all right if you're not a sports buff, but it's football season. Come on, Leslie. And
We're going to put on the spot for sports.
So let's go and take a look at that. Suppose we had something called, and again, this is SQL Server. So this is a schema NFL. This is the name of a table. So suppose we go in here and say, show me all the NFL rosters. Well, there are 2,451 people that are on NFL teams right now. That's interesting. And they have things like positions, they have teams, height and weight. These are big boys. Some of them are healthy, some of them are injured, so on and so forth. But you can see there's a lot of indicative data about each of these players. So as we work with the back end, we'd say, okay, well, what the user really wants is they want to sort these maybe by team. So Arizona comes first. Got it. Then you go down here and say, well, you know what? I'm a Philly guy. I just want to see the Philadelphia players. So there's all the Philadelphia players. There's 74 of them. And then you say, well, maybe I just want the quarterbacks. So there's the quarterbacks. And you can search for just one person. Now, that's all really easy to do. And if everybody just could look in databases all day long, they could find all the information they ever need. But we know that most websites are basically just a nice, pretty face that exposes data from a series of databases. So then we get into some interesting things. Suppose we take all of the NFL rosters. There's 2,451 of them. And each one of these has about 40 rows of or columns of information. That's too much data. So what we want to do is we want to skinny that down a little bit because it's going to take a lot of time to bring that down to the client. So we might want to do something like this. So here we're doing less columns. And then if we were to add the where clause and stuff like that. And now this gets even fancier. I don't know if the general audience is aware of stuff like this, but in SQL Server, there's a command called offset. What's an offset do? Well, an offset only works if you have an order by. And when you do that, it gives you 10 rows, and you can do them one page at a time. And the reason I'm pointing this out is if you're a full stack developer, you have to understand that there is a SQL way to do what the grid on the web page needs to do, which is present 10 rows at a time. So now we've narrowed this down so it has very few number of rows and a few number of columns. It's probably going to come back very fast. But then when you're on your grid, you're probably going to want to know, well, I'd really like to know exactly how many players are on Philadelphia, even though I'm only showing 10 at a time. So then you do something like this. From a SQL perspective, you say, okay, let's show the first 10 rows, but also return back the count of players for that team. Okay, so that is as much SQL Server as I'm going to show you today. On to the next step. Now, how do we get that into an API? Well, in the world of Microsoft .NET Core, this is incidentally .NET Core 7. The new one comes out in about a week and a half. We're going to make a series of APIs. So I have here an API called roster./all. I have one called roster, and then I have roster grid. And I'll tell you right now, the roster all does basically what I showed you in SQL Server. It brings back all the data of all the columns, and that's too much. That's too much data, and you'll see what that does when we test.
Right.
Roster is going to bring back just the 6 columns that I want to display on the screen, but it's going to give me all of the teams. Roster grid is going to do the trick where it only gives me 10 rows at a time. And it takes that a step further. It also is going to limit, using filters, what I want to display. As I showed you in SQL Server, I might say I just want a team of Philadelphia and a position of quarterback. Okay, so what does this stuff look like? Well, today's session isn't really about how to build APIs. I'll just show you real quick. But when I do minimal APIs, I tend to use an ORM called Dapper. And when I use that, I can do things like this. I can say, go get me all async of NFL roster. What is NFL roster? If I go to the definition, it is a C# type that has the names of all the columns that I would want to display. Okay, well, that's real easy. If you want to get fancy, then you actually type out the SQL query, just like you do in SQL Server. And if you want to get even fancier, down here, I'm building a filter, and I'm putting some positions, teams, and CS names. And I can take and put the filter in here. And as I showed you on SQL Server, I am doing a query that is going to do an offset, but I'm going to pass in the size of the page and what page number I'm on. And I'm going to, at the same time, ask for the count. And that's very easy to do on the back end because you can do a single query. And technically, this is faster for SQL Server to have these things bundled together. I can do a single query, and then I can say in my code, okay, go get the data, which is the first query up here, and then go get me the total records, which is just a single async of type int. And that's going to return back the count. Now, I know what you're thinking. This seems like a lot of trouble, but how is this going to get my data on the screen? Well, that's where you start to do testing. And if you want to test, let's go back to the slides real quick. So in VS Code, there is an extension for Playwright, and you can use this to run all your tests. It looks like this. See this little lab glass over here? That is actually going to be my tests, and we'll be getting into this in a moment. But traditionally, what a lot of people did is they started out with something called Swagger. Swagger is built into the .NET API, and it looks like this. So Swagger is a website that takes all of the APIs in my project and lets me run them. So for instance, I have something here called get version. And when I execute this, you'll see that it returns back version 1. Is my response 200 means success. If I were to take this a step further, I could go in here and say, okay, let's do the roster grid. Well, that looks complicated. I'm not going to test that right now. I'll just do roster. So I'm going to say, go get the roster. Now, the problem is the roster brings back 2,600 people. So it's going to take a little while. I think it's going to run. I guess I should wait. I don't know.
Well, while that's loading, we do have a couple questions in chat.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So the first
there
one.
They are.
Sweet. Cool. Let's answer some questions first, then we'll go there. So first up, is Playwright compatible with SOAP APIs?
Yeah, basically, yes, that is correct. It can do SOAP. It can do OAuth. It can do Open API. It can do all of those kinds of things. And I'll show you in a few minutes exactly how you code that. It's actually quite simple.
Okay, cool. And also, this might be getting a little ahead, but is it possible to implement dependency injection using Playwright?
Yes.
Awesome.
So, on with the show.
Cool.
Now, here's an example. When I said I'm going to look for a single player, when I do a single player, I have to pass the player's ID. And when I execute that, you'll see I get back a JSON structure that has all the information about my quarterback. So that's useful. So as I said, that's how people normally would test these things. When you're in Swagger, it will also show you something called the curl, which is a Unix-based utility for testing APIs. And I'm not recommending you do this, but I just thought I would show it to you real quick. If you go up here and you run that same thing on the command line, you get the data back. And if you're, a real command line developer, it's like, great, I got a JSON structure on the command line. You could port this into some other utility and have it display it prettier, things like that. You could save it as a file. The reason that the curl is useful, suppose I have an application and I'm building right now for banking and investments. It has about 400 APIs. Well, I wouldn't want to sit here and click on 400 one at a time, even though I get paid by the hour. I would probably want to automate this, and I could create a bunch of curl scripts and I could run them in succession. And that would be a way to prove that my APIs worked. Okay, so think about that for a moment. The next thing is a very popular tool in VS Code called RestClient. And I'm showing you this because this is what I normally use before I invest in Playwright. And I'll be there in a second. So RestClient is an extension. If you go to your extensions, you'll see I have installed the Playwright test for VS Code, and I also have installed RestClient, which is it's here somewhere. I've got a lot of extensions.
Oh, there you go. It's under Rainbow.
Right there it is. Very good. Okay, so you'll see there's 3.9 million downloads of this, and it has 5-star rating. That's probably pretty good.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah. So the way you work with RestClient, it's a little more manual. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my my test folder, and I have a file with the extension HTTP. And the RestClient understands what that means. And what it allows you to do is stuff like this. You can say, send me a request. And it just returned back, whoa, you have to give it a chance here, because it just returned back 2.56 megabytes of stuff.
Woo.
And it's going to take a little while to display because, yeah, there it is. But you'll see it's all there. Well, we're not going to check. That would be tedious. But it's all there, and it gets a little slow because there are so many responses. Okay, you can see it goes to line 86,000. So,
not that big.
but it works. Okay. Now, and that's part of the problem. If you're not careful with APIs, if you get too many columns and too many rows, it's going to go slow. So then you say, well, let's skinny this down to one player. That happens almost instantaneous. And you look down on the bottom here and you say that happened in 4 milliseconds and it only returned 1 kilobyte. That's useful. And in a few minutes, I'll show you where that appears in the front end.
And this is the result of having the RestClient extension.
Correct.
Awesome.
So the RestClient uses the HTTP file format, and you have these three little pound signs, and then each of those says you can do a request. You can do posts, you can do gets. Now, as an example here, suppose I do a more complicated post. And there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want page number 1. I want a page size of 5. I want Philadelphia. And that's how fast it is. And it just returned back basically the first page that you would display on a grid. Now, as I was showing you the code, I said it's useful if you're working in a front end. I want to show maybe 5 rows of data, but I also want to be able to tell the user how many total rows there are if they were to page through all of them. So I'm returning both of these as a complex data structure. So I have total records and data. If I change the page size to a 10, I can still send the request. It's almost instantaneous, and it still knows that I have 74 records. Okay, so that's the idea of using RestClient. Okay, now, what about Playwright? One of the problems with RestClient is there isn't a way to like automate it and tell it to run like 300 or 400 APIs to make sure they all work. How would I do something in Playwright? So the first thing I'll show you in Playwright is that it has a config. I'll do the one on the left here. It has a config file. And it says, I'm going to put all my Playwright tests in a folder called /tests, plural. Secondly, it has this thing called the base URL. The base URL is actually where my APIs are going to live for this particular project. Then down here, it says, which browsers do you want to use? Well, I know in my environment, I only want to do Chromium and WebKit. I don't need Firefox. Okay, and also notice down here, it has Microsoft Edge. If you're a Microsoft folk. Okay, now, let's go look at the test folder. So in the test folder, I have something called nflspec.ts. Okay, and it has in it a series of 8 UI tests. I'm going to explain those last, and API tests. Let's talk about API tests. So what I want to do here is I want to run the full roster API, which is NFL/roster, and I want to know whether it is truthy. And this is all TypeScript language here. So you see these little check marks on the left?
Mm-hmm.
If I click that, watch what happens on the bottom of the screen. It opens up a new panel below called Test Results, and it shows me on the right side that I just ran the full roster API. See that name? That's the token or name of my test.
Awesome. So as a follow-up to this real quick, does this mean Playwright is compatible with like the C# Dev Kit extension and like the Test Explorer and all that inline?
Absolutely, yes.
Functionality?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, this is actually using the Microsoft Test Explorer infrastructure. It sort of sits on top of it.
Awesome.
Okay, now, but I'm doing stuff that's really familiar to even front-end programmers. I'm doing like a console.log. Well, that's pretty easy. And all that's doing is throwing the result up, and guess what? There's the result. That's pretty easy. Now, technically, I don't need to put the expect to be truthy, because if I just run one of these, and now this is a player profile. This is the single player. This time, I'm going to run this, but not only am I going to get the result, I want to be able to see the data, because that's something that the RestClient did for me. So if I run this, lo and behold, I get the fact that it's successful, but I also get all the data. Okay, so my point is that Playwright is now doing what Swagger does. It also is doing what RestClient does, but it has this extra little element that it integrates with the Microsoft Test Framework. If I were to right-click this, I could run, I could debug. That's interesting. So what does it mean to debug? If I put a debug place in here and I say debug this test, let's see what happens. Aha! It popped right here, and let's do a skip over. Well, I must have a result. I do. I can see what's inside the result. Now, notice that when you get a result, that doesn't give you the actual data. You have to do another async call, another await, to get the text of the result. So if I skip over that, then what should happen is result down here should actually have the text of the data. I think I told it to do that. And hello. I think I confused it.
No worries, it happens.
Yeah. So I told it to finish the debugging, and it went to the end, and it went fine, and it ran. Okay. So the point here is that you can do a series of tests. Now, do you see how I have this word called describe? So describe says, these are all my tests that have to do with the NFL roster. And then I do the full roster API, I do a single player profile, and I'm going to filter and get a page full of results for just the team equals Philadelphia. And then down here, I'm going to say, give me the team Philadelphia, and then make the quarterback the position. What would that look like? Well, the cool thing about Playwright is these things are sort of nested. So if I click this little button here, watch on the right, on the bottom right corner, you see how it ran all 4 of those tests in succession, and it took the results and just put them all together for you. Now, please note that, you know, right now this is printing to the console. I could have it print to a file, and then I could go back and, you know, test that later on or inspect it. Okay, so that's the basic idea. We can set up our data to send into a request. We can take the results, we can display them to the screen, and since we can display the results to the screen, we could even do something like, say, expect the name to be Jalen or something like that. And that would come up as true, and then I would know that my API was returning back exactly as it should. Now, Playwright takes this a step further. If you go onto the left-hand side, there is what is called the testing section. And in here, you can see all of the tests for NFL. And you can run them from here. So if I were to click right here, it would then again run all of these tests, and you get a nice integrated pattern where you can go and test tons of APIs very fast and see how polite it is. It shows you how long each takes to run.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you are down here, see, it even takes inside each of these, it tells you how long each step takes. And somebody like me that is a full stack developer, very interested in performance, I use this to figure out, it's like, oh, that's where the big problem is. That's taken too long.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, now, so we've determined that we can actually do some testing of APIs. Where would we actually use this API? Well, we would use it, oops, I have to run the application. And this is the front end I built for this. Okay, and this is done in Angular. It gets all its data using the APIs from the C# Minimal API. If I go down to roster, there's my page of data. So I'm doing one page at a time. And I can go through this. You can see how fast each time I click this, it's making a call to the back end to get the next page of records.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the kind of experience we're looking for. Okay. So here you can see the APIs in action. If I were going to do something like PHI and then say equals, now you see that it brought back 74, remember the count?
Yep.
It brought back 74 players that are assigned to the Philadelphia team. If I want just the So now we've taken all the way from the database through the back end, the API layer, and to the front end, we can actually see the results.
Yeah.
Now, one other wrinkle here, suppose, well, we could do sorting. That's a fun thing. So I'm sorting. If I click this little show button, this is a trick. This comes up with a dialog with a player profile, and it's reading more detailed information. So what's actually happening in this application is when you load this component that displays the player profile, it makes an API call to just get the full number of columns for one player. And since you're only reading one, it happens very quickly. And when I say the full number of columns, that includes things like the URL to the player's picture, which you don't need for the general grid itself. Okay, so back to the slides. So I showed you how you can configure a base URL. You can do things with HTTP headers. You can do authorizations. I don't have time to show you that today. And you can do posts, gets, puts, deletes, all those things. So it integrates very well and it's fun to use. That's useful. Now, what if we wanted to actually test the screen itself? Well, there's a thing called the test generator. Let's take a look at that. So we're going to go in here and we're going to say on the bottom, there's a thing that says record new. Now, what that does is that opens up not my real Microsoft Edge or Chromium, but the one that comes with Playwright. So it's a browser engine. And we want to make it think that we're operating this. So we're going to click on that. See the little black labels?
Mm-hmm.
It's showing you what code you're going to need to write an automated test. So I know that I want to click on NFL. Then I want to scroll down and click on roster.
So this is cool. This is like your interactive cheat sheet kind of.
Oh, yeah. Well, what you didn't know is, see what it's doing in the background?
Oh, what? Yeah.
It's writing TypeScript.
That's awesome.
Okay. Now, as I demonstrated earlier, I want to go to this box, type PHL. Then I want to click on this filter and say equals. Then I want to go over here and say quarterback. I want to click and say equals. Then I want to show the player profile, and then I want to cancel it. Then I go back to here, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm done writing code, cancel. And this is what it creates for you. And it's a pretty easy language to understand. So it says, now notice it's all await. It's all asynchronous. Mm-hmm. So it says, let's go to this page. Then I want you to find an A tag that has the word NFL on it. I want you to click it. And let's do this. Let's close these guys on the right. It'll be easier for you to read the instructions here. Okay. Then it says, wait for a pop-up. Now, what do you mean wait for a pop-up? Well, technically, when you do NFL, this is a pop-up. So it's operating the drop-down menu. It finds the word roster, it clicks it. Then it waits for the page to return. Then it goes to the first text box and clicks it. Then it types in, see the word fill? It mm-hmm. types in the word Philadelphia. Then it looks for a button that is a T head, and it clicks it. That's actually going to do the drop down. then it finds the word equals, it clicks that, then the quarterback. I think you get the idea. So it's sort of fun to do.
Yeah, shoot. I mean, you didn't have to write any of that. You just got to go through the actual motions of what
Absolutely. And I've been on projects where they make a big deal about this. It's like, oh my God, we have to have a whole team of people to write test scripts. No, you just sit there, you click on things, and it writes the code for you.
Yeah, that's shoot.
Now,
what a time saver.
Let's do this. Let's go over, and this is called test. This is probably test 3. Okay. So what would happen if I ran this and I showed the browser? Ready? Oops. I should do that again faster. Normally I would do this side by side, but I'm trying to make the screen bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this and show the browser, and you'll see that it does exactly what I just told it to do.
Great.
Okay. So that's sort of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's pretend here. See where down at the bottom it says recorded cursor? Let's go in here and let's clear the position filter, and let's search for wide receivers. And there's AJ Brown, and we'll show his player profile. Okay. So what I just did there is I said, well, I have a working instance here, and now I can see here I'd have to fix this up because it thought that I wanted to start a whole new page, but I didn't need to because the page is already open.
Mm.
So now I've actually taken my script and enhanced it and added it to do an additional search by wide receiver and to call up a different player, which is AJ Brown. All right, that's sort of cool.
It's very cool.
Now, there's another thing here called, if you really want to get to finesse, you want a pick locator. What's a pick locator? Well, you see what happens? You mouse over things. It's like, how would I know what to type if I were going to click on this? And it shows you the locator is T-head, get by roll button, nth, fourth. So that means it must be the fourth button. Guess what? That's the third. That's the second. That's the first. That's the 0. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I did that, then over here, it takes this and I can press enter, and now it's in my cut and paste. So I can like go down and make these really exact. And there's a whole science to know how to use these things called locators and roles to find the right thing to run it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So it looks like you kind of have the manual option of being able to just selectively copy paste different actions and just the completely don't worry, we'll do it for you option. So
now suppose we want to get fancier about this. This one is called CodeGen. Now this is another tool they provide. So I to run that, if you're like a full-time test developer, you might want to go to the terminal, and we'll go to a different terminal window, and then we're going to say, we're going to say npx CodeGen Playwright. Okay. Get them in the wrong order. And let's do this. Aha. Okay. Well, now obviously I'm going to try not to buy something live here. TYR. So it knows that I'm a real person. Hey, there you go. Well, let's search for eagle shirt. That's not bad. Let's see. Ooh, that one's really wild.
That's intense.
I think I want one of those. And I think I want it in red. Nah, let's go back. We'll go gray. I'm a big guy, so I'm a XX large. Okay, and I'm going to add this to the cart. And then I want an eagle mug. And there we go. Nice Philadelphia Eagles mug here. And there we go. And I'll add that to the cart. So, see what it's doing on the right here?
Yeah, it's generating all that up.
So, any works with any website. And when I joked earlier about like automating this to get Taylor Swift tickets, you can. Because once you have this series of keystrokes down, you can sit here and say, run this very quickly, and you can get into the websites, and and that might be valuable to somebody at some point.
That is pretty nifty, not gonna lie.
Right. So that is a sort of a more traditional way to do test recording. I'm going to drop that out of here. I think did I actually finish? That's the question. I'm going to just quit out of that because I know we're running up on time. I showed you the pick locator. So I want to show you two more things, trace viewer and UI mode. So when we're in testing, there's a thing called the trace viewer. And we can run a test that we've already played with and have it run with the test viewer active. And watch what this does. Okay, so it just ran my script, but look at the top. See, it has like a timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I can actually see how long each of these steps took.
Great.
And I can see, like over here, I typed in PHI. And you see, Leslie, you see the little gray in the background? You can see that the little drop down is appearing so that I can actually see right there.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can click equals. Now I go quarterback. Now I click equals again. So once a analyst or QA person records a bunch of these, they can go through each screen and say, does it actually meet my requirements? Are the right things showing up as I fill in each of the forms? This is why and how you should be using this tool. So it's not only for developers, it's also for QA and business analysts. And if they were taught how to do this, they could get a world of information that would help them with their application.
It's pretty cool. It's like having a built-in profiler.
Yep. And as you can imagine, Leslie, what I just did here, this can be, you can run this and have it saved to a file.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
And it puts it in a zip file. And then you can save those. And then the QA team can sit there and spend hours, going through the time progression saying, is this screen showing the right data? Is it returning back in the right amount of time?
Good stuff.
Okay. The last thing I want to show you is, so in here, I did, there's one thing if I still have time, I want to show you. I think I closed my trace viewer. Let's run it again. Okay, so as it goes through each of these steps, see on the right-hand side, I can actually see what was in the browser console. I can see what requests were done. I can see what the response was from each of these. So if I know I have an error or something, I can actually figure out where the problem is. And then when you click on source, you have to think about what's happening here. It's not showing you the HTML source. It's actually showing you the source of your test. So you know what step you were in when it actually hit this particular spot.
Very helpful.
Okay, so that is our trace viewer. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to show you is called UI mode. And this sort of brings the whole thing together. And so you do npx playwright test UI. So if I'm back over here, I go to so this brings the whole thing together, and this is a tool for a professional tester. Okay, here are all the tests that I showed you earlier. Like if I want to look at my APIs, remember that was under NFL roster?
Mm-hmm.
So I could go down here and run this API, and it runs the test. And then if I go down to my console, I could actually see, I'm trying to remember, is it there? Yeah, there's my data. So it's not as pretty as you see it in VS Code, but it's got lots of data, lots of information for you to look at. If I go down here and run this one, okay. Now, what's cute about this is that I can do the same sort of thing that I did in VS Code. I can say, run all of my API tests. And then when I do that, I can step into each of them and see what's going on. And then if I go to test 3, which is the one I did with Amazon, let's do that one. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Test 3 was not Amazon. It was my testing of my application. So, so in here, this is the same thing I showed you earlier with the timeline across the top. But you can also go through the steps in your script to make sure that your script, see the little red button? It's saying, hey, you clicked equals.
Oh, okay.
See that?
Yeah. Nice.
So using this UI, you can actually go and sort of hone or fine tune your test to give you exactly the effect that you want to keep your testers happy.
Great. And what did you say this window was called? There was a question about it in the chat.
This is called UI mode.
Awesome.
So and if you go to hold on, I'll be there in a moment. If you go to the playwright.dev, so oops, darn it. Okay. So see up here, it's playwright.dev. That's the website. And then this is the .NET. If you're going to use it in a Node environment, it has separate instructions. If you're going to use it in Java, you can use it in all of those places. And it has all of the wonderful features and it tells you what companies use this. And then there's a vibrant community and people that they have ambassadors, which are sort of like MVPs. They have videos for training. So it's really easy to go in and learn how to use this. So I'm sold. I think this is a wonderful tool. And guess what this costs, Leslie?
Nothing?
It costs the exact same price as VS Code.
Great. So nothing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I technically I don't think it's open source. Somebody at Microsoft could correct me if It may be that people contribute to it. I don't know. I'm sure there's a project for it up in GitHub.
Awesome.
But basically, and it's funny because there's so many people doing this kind of work day to day, doing either full stack or doing, Angular, React, Blazor front ends, and they don't realize that this tool is available from Microsoft for free to really impress their team members.
Yeah.
And I get involved in a lot of these enterprise projects, and what they'll do is they'll hire somebody to do QA who's good at following instructions, but they're not really coders.
Mm.
And they have trouble. They're challenged when you go and try and write the automated code that I showed you, this stuff here.
Gotcha.
So you sort of have to have a team approach here, where the person who does the development of the API or the screen probably should do this part of the coding and then pass it off and show the testing people how to use it. And they could be using that UI mode at the end that like ties everything together.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, all of the tools that Playwright offers, it does seem to make it very accessible for really anybody, whether you're new to testing or you're a pro or you're more like a QA person. So,
yep. And these are just TypeScript files. They get put right in your GitHub repository with your other source code. They're versioned and all that stuff. And we don't. I know we're finishing up, but this does work with something called Selenium Grid, which means that you can have it run in a headless operation using CI/CD. So you could have a whole series of tests, and every time you do a build, it can automatically run all the tests, save all of the files so that the testers could review them later, and then tell you how many of your tests pass.
Awesome. And
so, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say before we close, there are some questions in chat that I wanted to see if we had some time to go through. If you're up for it. Cool, more minutes. Cool. So first question, let's start with going back to the football example that you're using. Could someone do a loop through each of the players' profiles and open it programmatically? If so, what would you test in each profile pop-up?
You can grab the response body, so you could look for any piece of data within there and match it up. In Playwright, they use the word expect. You see the top of my screen? Mm-hmm. It says import test expect. And when you do expect, you're asking it, does something match? Other words, is this the text I was looking for?
All righty. And then next question, can you run Playwright and automated CI/CD pipelines?
Yes, absolutely. I just tried to explain that in a hurry.
So cool, just confirming.
Yes, you can have it do that. On the Project Demo one, we're not doing that. I just use Playwright to do, sort of unit testing on my own development laptop. Mm-hmm. They are a Selenium shop, so they have somebody else that sits there all day and writes Selenium scripts.
Cool. And this next question, we may not have time to demo it, but could we see how failed tests are presented? So like in the test explorer, at the very least, I know you could see the X saying that it failed.
And that's an excellent question. I didn't think to add that to my presentation. Let's do this. Let's go back. Where were we here? Let's go back to, come on, Bill. I'll just try and do this real quick. Under the tests folder, we should have NFL spec. So I have some tests here, and one of them checks to make sure the title, the browser title, is Agility Sports. Okay, so if I were to run that test, see on the lower right-hand corner, it comes up green. well, what if we did something silly, like made this agility spurts? And if I did that and ran it, what would happen? Aha.
There we go.
So you see, you get all these red with the X's, and then it comes up here and it says, I was looking for this and I found that. So this is what I found, but but my boss wanted me to look for SPURTS. See that? So that's sort of, I think, and all of these, whenever you do an expect, it gives you all that sort of like juicy, detailed information so you can understand what is not correct on the screen or not correct in your test.
Gotcha. It's pretty neat. Next question. This is more of a follow-up to a previous question, but regarding the dependency injection question from earlier, and we probably don't have time to write out a full example of how to do it, but are there cases where you might want to use dependency injection using Playwright, and are they documented? Is that process documented anywhere that you know of?
Yeah, I read some articles, some examples on that. Let's think through how you might do that. Suppose you have a service that reads from the database, and we know that we want to run a series of tests, and we might want to create like 5 new records. Well, I could store the 5 new records in a database table. I could then create a service that goes out and gets those 5 records, so I knew what to put into my script to exercise the screen and have it add a new player. Okay, well, if I did that, then what I would do is I would add that service with dependency injection to my test, and then that would be available to me within my scripting.
Awesome. Cool.
I mean, there's other ways to do that. I could call an API, but
sure.
I could just have a service called the database directly. So, you're basically either working in a C# or TypeScript environment, and all the things that you're used to doing in those environments you have access to here.
Gotcha. So that's just one way to go about it. And then last but not least, last question. How does this tool understand HTTP requests and wait for the responses? Like, what's kind of happening behind the scenes?
Well, my guess is the people that are working on Playwright walked across campus in Redmond to the other building where the people that create Microsoft Edge and they know how they know how to sort of orchestrate Edge from within. And I'm not an expert at that kind of stuff, but there are certain APIs you can call to the browser to tell it to do things as if somebody was typing or whatever. And that, when I remember at the beginning of the presentation, Leslie, I mentioned this concept of puppeteer. Well, puppeteer is actually that approach. It's that way to sort of manipulate a browser from behind the scenes. And the reason Playwright is so fast is that they have the intimate knowledge that they got from the Microsoft Edge team of how you actually operate a browser and do things efficiently. And they're able to, go inspect the DOM at any point in time, change it, see what happens.
Gotcha. And that commenter just added a follow-up clarification. They meant when we record our actions on a browser, so using that recorder functionality that you demoed earlier.
I don't know. It takes,
I guess it's a good question.
It takes screenshots, it captures data, it puts it in a big blob of stuff, and
Yeah.
There's a lot there. I've only scratched the surface on this presentation.
Yeah, totally fair. And I
Yeah.
think it would be a fun follow-up to like grab some people who actually worked on the tool, who might be able to shed some light on like, yeah, what is happening behind or under the covers, I guess.
Yeah,
So.
I'll tell you this. Here's a good thing for you to look at. Where is it? There's a to-do item. This comes when you install Playwright.
Mm-hmm.
So this actually connects to the playwright.dev website and goes to a sample app called To Do.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot by reading this. So it shows you like how to make an array of fake data. And then down
Awesome.
here, it actually creates the rows of data. It fills them in. It checks to make sure that you have a certain number. But you can sort of, by following this example, you can sort of understand what is possible with this kind of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these commands, I didn't even scratch the surface, as I said.
Right. Well, awesome. This was a really jam-packed episode filled with a lot of content. I think clearly people are really into this. There was a comment earlier saying Selenium might be in trouble and other similar tools. So, Bill, thank you so much for sharing all of this.
All of the enterprise architects and all of the the executive directors that don't bother to actually do the work, Selenium is their baby. Because it's in the top quadrant or whatever of one of those charts. But and Microsoft, I don't think markets this a lot because they didn't build this to like make big time profit. They just, to me, that this is just a good example of Microsoft doing conscientious tool development for developers.
Yeah, I think this is cool to see. I remember when it was like soft launched a couple years ago. It's been a minute, but it was still in its early stages, and it's cool to see how far it's come since then. I haven't seen it in a minute, so I'm really excited to see all those different, like the trace view and the UI view and all the recording functionality. That's really cool stuff.
Yeah, so. give it a try. And if you want to have some fun, walk along campus and ask like 10 different people if they know what Playwright is, and I bet you one of them will say yes.
Awesome. At least one. I know what it is. So if you see me, I'm on campus a bit. Yeah.
Like I said, Microsoft does not promote this a lot, and they should.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you so much. If people want to follow up with you on more questions, because chances are we didn't get to everyone's questions, where can they follow up with you?
I could give them my email address now. That can be scary at times, but
no worries, you don't have to. But if you have like any social media spots like Twitter or X or whatever.
Yeah, I don't do Twitter anymore. Gave that up for certain reasons, and I have an MVP profile. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can easily find me. The trick is middle initial is J, so search for Bill J. Wolff.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, Bill, thank you so much once again for coming on the show. This has been really cool, and yeah, thanks again.
All right.
And to everyone watching, thank you so much for watching this really big, really long, but really informative episode all about Playwright. Go check it out at playwright.dev to get started. And until next time, happy coding, y'all. So see you next time.
Enjoy.